Okay. Sorry for that. My computer was on the fritz. Anyway. Today we're gonna talk about something that is actually, pretty useful in, game programming, and that's, user-defined, data types. Or, at least that's one of the things you can call them. And it is primarily what you're going to be doing should you decide to try to actually make games. Most of the things you'll be using are constructed. So you might have noticed that this is a slightly different look than the previous videos. This is actually a Visual Studio 2013 preview, and my computer is still apparently on the fritz. But, that's okay. I think. I don't know. Yeah, it looks fine. It's close enough. Okay, so, what am I talking about? Well, so far, well, we've only, used, the data types that are native to C++. So, you've seen int, float, double, boolean, stuff like that. And, well, they're okay, provided you never need anything but basic numbers. Oh, you have string, too, but that's not really important. I'm gonna guess that my computer's okay right now. So, if you'll remember way back when, the first thing I had you do was create a source file. Now, we're gonna go up here to header. Right click, add new item, .h. This is called a header file, and I'm gonna call it my, I can't type today, first class. In the future, don't name anything my first class, or at least for anything you actually do. Try to use descriptive names, okay? Now, I'm going to use some more modern C++ standards when I do my programming. The old way to do something like this, oh god, was relatively complicated. Let's see. Okay, so the old way of doing this is pound if and def. Let's call it my first class underscore h, pound define, caps lock, my first class underscore h. And then after you've defined, you would do n and if. Okay? So that's the old way of doing it, and some people apparently still swear by it, but that, to me, is 3 lines of code that you don't actually need to write. Not saying you don't need to write something. You do need to write something, but you can do all 3 of those in 1 line of code that I think is a lot easier to type. Pragma once. Basically, it means the exact same thing as the other thing. Well, I guess not the exact same thing, but it performs the same thing. The other way basically told the compiler, if this is not defined, define it, and the last bit was an end if, which is Pragma. It's pre-compiler stuff that you don't really need to worry about. Pragma once basically says, everything here, just define it once. If you don't do something, it will try to redefine these things multiple times, usually, and it will cause a lot of errors. You probably won't compile at all. It'll fail, usually. Okay, so, you saw me type my first class. Sorry for some of the font. Oh, looks like the font's gone back to here. Oh god, that's a little big, but there we go. Okay, so you saw me type my first class, or more or less. heard of me at least. What's a class? Well, a class is a way to contain, to hold data and do other things with it. It's gonna be used similarly to pretty much the other data types, int, double, except you create it. So you can have an array that holds a bunch of classes instead of just a bunch of ints. I'm gonna do, well, how do you make it? That's probably helpful. Class, my first, and I can't type again, first class, again, don't name things like that, oh, back. Apparently it decided to auto-indent that for me. That's nice. I didn't tell it to. Anyway, when you declare a class, you use these open and close curly Q things, and the closed one is followed by a semicolon. Now, to talk about classes, you also need to talk about something else, something called a struct. Now, a struct is almost identical in every way to a class. My first struct. In fact, it has basically one difference only, and that is the default declaration of its data members and functions. And yes, that's right, you can have these, class or struct can have its own functions that you can call from the object. I know this is just a massive amount of information to take in, but once you start doing this yourself, it makes a fair bit more sense than me yammering on about it, and you will probably see all of the really cool things that you can do with this under your belt. So once you understand it, you'll see all sorts of things that you can do with it. So what do I mean by the default thing? Basically, a struct is more of a container of things, and a class is more of a full object. But anyway, I'll get back to structs in, I'll get back to structs in just a moment. What do I mean by default? Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Private. This is anything underneath private is only accessible inside of my first class. So if I do an int MID or something, that ID would be only accessible inside of my first... Oh, that's why that looked weird. Because I can't spell. I kept looking at that way. Why does it not look right? Because I can't spell. Okay, so that means that I can only access MID inside of my first class. Which means that if, okay, now this is probably going to throw up a bunch of red squigglies, okay? But if I did something like this in the main file, which doesn't have access to this stuff just yet, but if I did something like this, hi, and then I tried hi dot MID, see the, okay, you can't see it, but there's this little tiny lock right here. You'll see it probably on your own thing, but anyway, I wouldn't be able to access it. Is this... Okay. This declaration is no storage class type. Let me see if that does anything. No? Okay, so basically, if I wouldn't be able to access MID. Let's try equals 0. Does that do anything? Okay. But anyway, I wouldn't be able to access MID because it's a private data member of my class. Now, you might ask, why don't I want to be able to access MID? Well, for most software engineering type stuff, you want to keep the end user, that's the person playing the game, from being able to mess with certain things. And making something private is a pretty good way of doing that. However, the issue with making something private is you can't actually modify it unless you do something else. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that because it's not going to do anything. Okay, so I mentioned private already. Well, if it's private, what else could I do? Well, there's also public, and public means that it would be accessible, so I could do something if it were in public. Generally, your constructor and destructor are public functions. Or, I don't know. They're not technically functions, I guess, but you don't even know what those are yet. Okay, so what is a constructor, and what is a destructor? They are what is called when you create an instance of my first class. So, way back over here, see here I have int guy equals 0. Okay, well, because this is a default sort of data member, if I don't do equals 0, it still is going to call a constructor. C++ will call the default integer constructor, which, by the way, just generates a really weird number. It's basically a random value. Don't try to do it as a controlled random value. It's just going to be garbage data, but it'll likely get interpreted as an integer, and it'll be complete garbage data. But that's what it's essentially doing. However, for our stuff, we may want to say, instead of have it hold a bunch of garbage data, we could initialize all of its member variables to something useful. So I'm gonna just do I don't think that'll, yeah. Okay, so it's gonna need me to do something with string, so give me a second here. Okay, yeah. That'll make it, yeah, stop yelling at me. Okay, so these are default. Okay, now that you've seen private and public, I should mention that I could get rid of this and these would still be private. A class defaults to private, which means that if you don't put public anywhere in your class definition of a class, everything you put in here would default private. So you wouldn't actually be able to do anything with it aside from move it around. In fact, you wouldn't be able to construct it because the default constructor would be private. Or at least if you made one. Which, you know, could be a bit of an issue. However, I'm just gonna put private back in there just because I tend to break up my code like that. However, for a struct, the opposite is true, and that is that everything is default public for a struct. That is literally the only big difference between them. Other than that, you can define them identically. The only difference is the keyword and what they default to. However, in the C++ community, generally a struct would hold data. So if you had a bunch of stuff like IDs, like player score, name, PSN, whatever you want to call it. You'd throw all of that in a struct of some kind, and then you'd pass that around inside of an array or something like that. So this is more for holding a bunch of stuff. A class can certainly hold things, but it usually, if you make a class that has data members and stuff, you generally do other things with that data aside from just pass it around. Just passing it around is kind of what a struct is good for, whereas a class, you would be able to do something along the lines of changing something. Let's see. Let's call it void 0 ID. Okay, so it's stupid, but if I were to call my first class's 0MyID data member, it would change MID to 0. Well, it would if I had defined it like that, but if you'll notice, I haven't actually defined any of these function calls. I've just declared them. And that's pretty much what you want to do for a header file. Remember, this has a .h extension rather than a .cpp. Now, let's see. I'm going to change a few things here real quick. I'm going to change this to take some parameters. ID and string name. Destructor probably shouldn't take any parameters unless you want to. I wouldn't advise it though. Anyway, so I'm going to define those there, and because these are private, I'm going to show you how you would access or change them. Get ID and as the string get name and set ID and set name, or I'll just call it name me. What the hell? I hit end to get to the end of the line, and anyway, that turns out to end my recording, so small difference in timestamp possibly, but anyway, moving on. So I've just created these 4 functions. These functions belong to the class type of my first class, and they're called setters and getters, or accessors and mutators. A getter or accessor is these 2 here. They do the most basic thing you could possibly imagine, or they will. I haven't defined these yet. I want to make sure that you realize that these are all just declarations. That's telling the compiler that these functions should exist somewhere, but not here. They haven't been defined, just declared. So they will exist, and it's up to the compiler to figure out where. Okay, I'm gonna kind of show it where, but you'll figure that out in a second here. But what an accessor or getter does is it gets or accesses something. In this case, ID and name. Or it will. Get ID, get name. Getter, see? Set is setter or mutator. It changes what is here. Or it will. Again, I haven't defined that yet, and we're about to. Okay? So, getter, setter. Pretty easy to figure out. And we can do other stuff, but we're gonna keep it simple for now. in order to define these, we're going to make another source file, okay? So, add new item. I hit Solution Explorer, source files, and now I'm going to add a new item. Now, you'll see .cpp up here. In best practice, try to make the name of the .cpp file match the header file's name. So this will be my first class, and then it'll that's good for now. My first class add. Okay. Now, this is another source file, just like main. It has the same exact extension. However, I need to include the header file. See, this is a header file, and in order to define these, I need to, well, I could define them here. Declare and define them all in the header file. However, it is best practice to leave the definitions in a source file. This way you can get around some lengthy compile times. So you include my first class. Note the include of your own stuff. Oh crap, it did it again. The inclusion of your own stuff has quotation marks rather than open the two alligator signs. Okay? That denotes that it's something you wrote, so make sure you note that. And also, just something you can do, at least in Visual Studio, is kind of cool. Split screen. This makes what I'm about to do a little bit easier. However, there is a slightly easier way of doing this, and I'm just gonna be fancy here and do it the easy way. See? Does that for me. Just putting that out there. There is stuff that'll do that for you. Visual Studio won't do it for you automatically. That was another Visual Assist X thing, but what you will do is you do the class type, class type, and then do this. This allows you to do so MID equals ID, and looks like it spreads that out for me. Nice. Not what I normally like to do, but okay. So here we can see that it'll set the ID and name here. Okay. Now I'm going to be lazy and let it do all this for me. Not that I don't know how, but I only recently figured out that it'll do this for me. There's a shortcut to access the menu that I'm using. But anyway, you would do that for all of these. In the destructor, you would call delete on certain things, but that's not important. For now, just know that a destructor is called anytime an object is destroyed, and we will get more into these a fair bit. Well, maybe not too much later. I think I have a few more things to talk about before we get into those. But this, return MID, that's pretty easy, right? Okay, return mname. Okay, and MID equal ID, and name equal new name. Also, if you accidentally put a space here, you'll notice the new keyword here highlights, and it makes this not work. I know why, and I will tell you probably either the next tutorial or the one after. Just remember not to put a space there, and you'll be fine. And if you figure out how to get around this squiggly line and still use new, don't, unless you know what you're doing. Because if you don't know what you're doing, new is going to get you into a world of trouble before you know it. So, that's the CPP file. This is where I have defined all of those functions. If you'll notice, I didn't do anything with struct. And you're right, I didn't. However, I am going to rename this as, actually I'm not going to rename it at all. Screw it. It's not important. We'll talk more about structs later. Just regard them as a sort of container for easy transference of data. A simplified example would be you could create a struct and initialize something like my first class with a struct. Your struct would have an ID and a name, and then you'd only have to pass in the struct, and you'd get its ID and name and use those. That is one way of doing it. However, there are several other uses of structs. However, I primarily use classes, and that's just personal preference, to be honest, but now you know about classes and structs, and you can do all sorts of crazy things with them. So, now you've seen that. However, I'm going to close this. You don't need it open the entire time. I want to use my first class I just defined in the main source file here. So I'm going to do my first class.h, and then I will, let's see, I'm going to do my first class, let's see if I still remember. Yeah, okay. Array of classes of a size, let's do 20 this time. Oh good, it fixed that for me. No default constructor exists for... oh. Yeah, they're right. Okay, so I guess I did forget to mention how to define these things in the header file. So I'm going to be lazy and do it. Okay, that's it. In best practice, probably want to set these to something moderately useful, or no name. Alright, that should work. Yep, okay, so that's a default constructor. If you had noticed what it was saying here, it said that no default constructor exists for the type myFirstClass. A default constructor is a constructor like this. It takes no parameters and is something you should almost always define, as you should always have a default constructor for pretty much anything. I generally just start out with a default constructor for all my stuff, and then I add other constructors. So that's kind of important to note, that you should always probably have one of these if you're doing anything with it. So, let's just go through here real quick. Let's see. I'm gonna do a little for loop here. Int I equals 0. I is less than 20. And old C++ thing. Some people argue that you should always do ++i instead of I++. It should be a little bit, tiny bit faster and a little bit less memory used, but honestly, today's compilers are probably going to do this for you instead. You just won't see it. I guess you could if you looked at the assembly, but I don't really want to look at assembly again. It's very, very tricky to look at. So if you want to, be my guest. Anyway, let's see. I'm gonna do a std. Oh no, wait, I don't need to do that. String should be fine. And name. See out. Enter a name for ID I no, don't need it. End line. I don't think I need these either. Oh crap! What the? I think I hit the wrong thing there. Oh, that's what I did. Okay. Okay. So that'll do that. So you'll enter a name. Cn. Let's see. Do I still remember to do this? Cn.getLine. Let's see. And name. Huh. Guess I forgot how to do that. Comma, size count. 256. No instance of. Huh. I know I've used that before. Huh. Okie dokie. I don't know. Let's try just doing this. I think that'll work. Oh well. If it doesn't, it's not really a big deal. My first class, I'm going to use I and a name. Probably should do my first class, and class equals, and oh, I hit the wrong key. Array of classes at I equal end class. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly comment out these bits and see if this works the way I think it will. Certainly might not. Yeah. Don't show again, and yes. If that happens, it's just telling you that you need to rebuild your project, and go ahead and just say okay. I usually just click don't show me this again because I just want it to rebuild the thing. Okay, enter a name 0. Who, blah, 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 blah. Really probably should have done a smaller number. Okay. So, at least that appeared to work, but, you know, we can't be too sure of that, so, hope you don't mind. We're just gonna get rid of all this, because it's really not very helpful, or useful at all. Okay. So, I am going to write another function. You remember functions, right? Okay. So, what am I going to do? Alrighty, I'll show you. I'm going to do string get name from array by ID. So, what am I going to do? I'm going to pass in my first class of size 20, as well as an ID, which is an int ID. Let's see, array, ARG array. I may have mentioned that these are called arguments. Let's see. Enter. I don't know why it's asking me for this. Oh, that's why. Again, I don't really work with arrays a whole lot. There's something much easier to work with than arrays. Sorry. Anyway. So, get name from array by ID. So, what do we do here? Int I equal 0. I is less than 20. Plus I. And arg array I dot get ID if the ID that is returned is equal to the argument ID. Argument, parameter, pretty much the same thing. If the ID is equal to that, then return arg array at I dot get name. Okay? And if all else fails, string null ret val equals no ID, no class matching the given ID was found. Return null return value. Okay. Now, you'll notice I have two returns here. That's okay. What this is doing is it will iterate through this array, and if this ever becomes true, which means the ID I passed in was found, it will return the name. However, if it runs through this entire for loop without actually finding me a name, it will go here and it will return this. Okay? So we have that, and I'm gonna get name from ID, Control V. Okay, let's see. How do I do this control structure here? You know what, I'm just gonna do a simple while true Control V, cout, enter ID for lookup. Cout. Oh, I need to do that too. Oh, wait, I can do this. Int ID equals 0 while ID is greater than or equal to 0. Oh, it's asking for a semicolon. Okay, then delete. Cin ID and ID equal 0, just to make sure that that's proper. ID and that should work, I think. Okay, save all. Okay, let's see if this runs. Okay, now I'm gonna have to do a bunch of stuff. For this, I'm gonna do 0 ein y dry for 5 6 7 8 9 10. Doing this for debugging purposes, you want to make sure that what you're doing is correct. This is a 11. Close enough. 12. This is a decent way to figure it out. Also, just so you know, you can do this, and if you make it long enough, you can scroll through. 13. Let's just, for the hell of it, speed this up. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, enter ID for lookup 0, 1, 19, okay, and -1. No classes for -1 were found, so congrats, this runs, and decently shows you more or less what to do. Okay, so let's try a slightly different sort of approach. I've always wanted to try this. Create, change signature. Huh. Oh well. So, instead of doing this, I'm going to Let's try a void set name by ID. Okay, so same thing as this. Control C, back, Control V. Of course, I'm going to need to input a name. Let's see. Let's string n name. It's going to basically be this. Control C, Control V. Let's see. Okay, so dot name me with the new name, and obviously we don't need to return anything. However, I'm still going to put a return statement in here. This will basically, the reason I've put the return statement in here is it's going to iterate through this, and then if it'll find this, I don't want it to continue iterating through because I've already found it. Don't need to. Okay. So, Control C, enter ID for lookup. And enter, Control V. Okay. Remember the, let's do int choice equals 0. Cout. You remember switch statements, right? Enter 2. No. Enter 0 to choose a new ID, or 1 to change this ID's name. Okay, so we're going to do switch statements. Switch. Oh, we also need to remember to cin choice. Okay, switch on choice. Case 0. Let's see. Break. And case 1. Let's see. Oh, set name by ID is case 1. So, Control K, Control D. Okay, so now we need to get a new name. So, cout, enter new, oh, there's that keyword new again. Enter new name for ID, ID, and L, string, C1 and name, cin, C1 and name, and here, Control C, Control V, comma, C1 in name. Break. And the compiler will yell at you if you don't put a default case, so put a default case. Let's see. Okay. That looks pretty good. Of course, I didn't really run through. I forgot to do that. I'm not gonna do that again. Okay. So, real quick, let's make this go a lot faster. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, and 5, 5. Alright, so now we only have 5 names to enter. That's good, because entering 20 took way too long. Let's try again. Okay, null ein is y dry for. Okay, enter ID for lookup 0. Enter null, enter 0 to choose a new ID. Okay, 0, enter. Enter ID for lookup. Let's try 2. Zwei. Let's try 1. Enter new name for ID 2. 2. Enter ID for lookup 2. 2. Okay. So we have a program that works. -1. Enter ID for lookup. Oh. I forgot to. Okay. Don't worry about it. Just enter -1. And apparently that doesn't work. Okay. Okay. So that was moderately complicated, but it should give you a decent insight into classes and member functions, because you can do quite a bit with member functions. This is the bare minimum sort of deal here. So this is a very simple console application that has, albeit limited at the moment, practical sort of uses. You could do this for, archiving your favorite games or something, making an inventory list of some kind. Granted, it doesn't actually save it anywhere, so you'd have to keep the thing running, but anyway, that's a sort of quick lookup thing. And I'm sure this tutorial has gone on plenty long. So, that's an introduction to structs, classes, and how to use them with what we've got so far. Hopefully you found it somewhat helpful, and look forward to seeing what else you people can come up with. See you around.